Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Catholics, our separated brethren, the Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox, and of course those who, unfortunately, no fault of their own, are the descendants of those who rejected the true Christian faith in the 16th century and called themselves Protestants. But as long as you believe in the Trinity, welcome. Because today we're going to be discussing, I'm not going to discuss too much, actually, it's mainly for Catholics, especially for those who seek the truth, is Pope Leo XIV's inaugural speech for his enthronement, for his inauguration of his Petrine ministry, for taking over officially, starting his functions as the successor of Peter, as the Vicar of Christ, as the Supreme Pastor of the Universal Church, as the Patriarch of the West, as the servant of the servants of God. And it is a magnificent speech, really. Of course, some people who, with little understanding, will always find something to criticize, or a way of, especially those who are truly zealous or maybe have suffered over 40, 50 years of lukewarmness through the pontiffs and the bishops, would have loved to have, say, Pope Leo XIV say certain things in a much more aggressive, a much more explicit, and a much more exclusive manner. But that would not be wise. That would not be prudent, because Christ himself told us to make friends of those who are who control the world, those who have power. He told us to be as wise as serpents, but as gentle as doves. Not to hide the truth, but to declare it. But we don't need to declare it, I guess, we want to basically tell the truth and bring people to the truth without repelling them. That's the key. And like if you're walking down the streets and you see these street preachers, the self-appointed spreaders of the gospel, yelling and screaming at everybody, hey, you're going to all go to hell if you don't believe. Have you been born again? Did you accept Jesus into your heart? If you're not, you're going to hell. The whole world is going to hell. How many converts, how many true believers actually join these groups? Not too many, I don't think. I just walk past them and I think, oh, poor people. So you have to, but in this inaugural speech, Pope Leo XIV basically told the whole world there is one truth, one church, which is the Catholic Church, and the whole world, including those who are separated brethren like Christian churches and ecclesial communities, need to join that one family of Jesus Christ, the one family of God. But how we approach it is, he's saying, we approach it in love. This is the function of the office of Peter. So, and he repeated a theme which is dear to my heart, and I've repeated it countless times in countless videos and in personal conversations and in comments on X or wherever else, on Facebook. For those who believe the Pope is a demigod, a walking God, where his word is law. The Pope said, therefore it's true. The Pope said, so bow down and worship. No, the Pope, as Leo XIV, repeats what Pope Benedict XVI said, and both said on their inaugural address, is that the Pope is not a dictator. The Pope is not an autocrat. The Pope is not an absolute monarch whose will is law. No, he's bound. Anyways, so I'm just going to go not through the whole thing. You can go watch other commentators. You can listen to him yourself on YouTube. EWTN has the full English translation. You can listen to the whole thing. You can read it on the Vatican website. So I don't want to waste your time by just reading it. You can do that yourself, but I'm going to point certain things which I really think are very, 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 very important. And there's going to be one section where I'm going to compare it to what Pope Benedict XVI himself said. All right, so let's shouldn't be too long of a video. And in case while you're watching this you think, oh, did you hear about what Pope Leo said to the when he was in meeting non-Catholic leaders and even the Eastern Orthodox and other Christians and non-believers. As Pope Leo himself made clear, he made a distinction between the baptized, who he calls the believers, and and everybody else, which are the non-believers. There's a clear distinction, and I've mentioned it in the one or two previous videos. Before you say, oh, look, he talks about, oh, so ecumenical, oh, synodal way, oh, he talks to Muslims and Jews and whatever. No, just calm down, take a breath, take a chill pill, as they used to say in the 80s or something. And I'm going to go through that. Again, magnificent, clear speech. Oh, he talks about the synodal way. Yeah, like I explained in the previous video on when he talked to the Oriental and Eastern Orthodox churches, Eastern Catholic churches, that he quoted actually Pope Francis talking about that the Catholic Church, the Roman Church has to learn the correct way of what it means to be synodal from the East, which has a history of that. And as I pointed out in the previous video, a Greek Catholic bishop told Francis, what's going on in Rome has no equivalent in history, is not what the synodal way or the synodal church is in his history and in the East. So when Leo talks about that, he is specifically talking about the correct meaning, the correct interpretation. He is sanitizing Francis. All right, so we'll leave that to the next video. But this video, we're going to go through the important things of his inaugural speech. First of all, I want to point out the title of on the Vatican website for his speech. It says, Holy Mass for the beginning of the Pontificate of Pope Leo XIV. Homily of the Holy Father Leo XIV, St. Peter's Square, Sunday, 18 May 2025. Compare that to the title for Pope Benedict XVI. It says Mass of Possession of the Chair of the Bishop of Rome. Mass of the Possession of the Chair of the Bishop of Rome. Homily of His Holiness Benedict XVI. Basilica of St. John Lateran, Saturday. No. So sorry, there's a bit of my mistake. Basilica of St. John Lateran, Saturday, 7 May 2005. So this is two different things. First, it was for the Pontificate of Leo XIV, which Benedict probably had another speech for. But I'm quoting this speech from John Lateran, which actually Pope Leo XIV, coming up in the next few days, he's going to go take possession of the chair of Peter in St. John Lateran in Rome. So we'll see what he says in that speech. But I'm quoting this one from Pope Benedict XVI because it coincides so well about especially the Pope as basically a walking God. For some Catholics thinking the Pope is a walking God. And how we are to understand truth, really. So, I'm not going to read it. As I said, you read it or watch it or whatever. So he talks about the Bishop of Rome as the Pope. Let's see here. The power of teaching, of teaching frightens many people, and this you will hear the echo of that. No, I was talking about Okay, here's the homily of Pope Leo XIV. Again, as I said, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, just certain things. He talks about the conclave and how basically all the cardinals somehow coalesced together and chose a new, and here it specifically says, a new successor of Peter, a new bishop of Rome, a new shepherd capable of doing what? What is this shepherd they wanted to do? Capable of preserving the rich heritage of the Christian faith. So the rich heritage would include all the rites, the ceremonies, the traditions, the disciplines, the spiritualities of the Catholic Church, which is basically what he told the bishops of the Oriental Eastern Catholic Churches a few days before. He told them, we want to recover what we have lost. The mystery, the tradition, the heritage, which we in the West, the Roman Church, has lost. So they wanted a successor who is going to preserve the rich heritage of the Christian Church, or the Christian faith, which, of course, is primarily the liturgies and the spiritualities and the traditions. And then, of course, he says, there's something in my eye. Of course, he says there's, of course, looking forward and dealing with all these problems in the world, which the church has to deal with. But I wanted to point that point first. And then he says, without, I was chosen, without, and this is true humility, without any merit of my own. Like, I don't even deserve to be chosen. So for those who say, does he deserve? Is he qualified? Oh, he's only been a cardinal for a couple of years. He only worked for Rome for a couple of years or a year and a half. Is he qualified? So he says, without any merit, I didn't deserve any of that. I was chosen by the cardinals to become the successor of Peter. And now with fear and trembling. If you read his speeches or listen to him, they are sprinkled throughout with echoes from the Holy Scriptures, from the Gospels, from the Old Testament, from the prophets, from the fathers of the church, from the ancient saints. It is all there. And fear and trembling is part, it's all over. You have to fear the Lord. It's part of all of Scripture, even in worship, even in the old liturgies. I believe probably in the West and as well, I know in the East, you approach the table of the Lord, the altar of God, with fear and trembling. You're approaching the Almighty Lord. You are approaching the Holy of Holies to receive the incarnate God with fear and trembling. So this is a word which is repeated a lot in the liturgies. And he continues, Leo says, I come to you as a brother who desires to be the servant of your faith. His function, his servant of to serve their faith, to give them. Like what do servants do? They prepare, they clean, they arrange, they help, they for the people. So he's the servant of the servants of God. This is as St. Gregory the Great, Pope St. Gregory the Great added that title. I'm the servant of the servants of God. So he's serving their faith, so their faith will not fail. And he will basically serving their faith, so he, as Christ told Peter, to strengthen their faith. And your joy. So he's a servant of your faith and your joy, walking with you. So he's walking with them on the path of God's love. And I was mentioning before in the previous video on walking together towards the Lord. He says in the previous one, Christ is ahead of us and we're following him. That's why in the posture for worship, for all the ancient churches, even those who haven't been in communion with the Roman Church since the 300s, all of them face the Sun of Justice, as he called it in the Orient when he was talking to the Eastern bishops. The Sun, meaning S-U-N, Jesus Christ, the rising sun. where Christ rose to the east, and where he would come from the east. So all of them, worship is directed to the east. So he's not giving his back to the faithful in the liturgy, if we're talking about the liturgy. We're all together, priest and people, facing the direction of the rising sun, the direction where Christ will come. So we are all going, we're walking together on the path of God's love. For he wants us all to be united. Now, all these commentary at that moment, like up to, well, I'm going to point it out, it is directed specifically and basically only to Catholics, to those Catholics there, for Catholic Christians. So, again, I'm going to repeat it. I come to you as a brother who desires to be the servant of your faith and your joy, walking with you on the path, and it's like one path, the narrow road of God's love. For he, God, wants us all to be united in one family. At the end of his speech, he is inviting the whole world, believers, non-believers, separated brethren, to join that one family of God, which is the Catholic Church. So he wants us to be all united in one family. Love and unity. So, and he talks about love and unity. These are the two dimensions of the mission entrusted to Peter by Jesus. And I'm not sure if I should... I'm going to read that part, if you can remember it, because that is exactly what Pope Benedict XVI says on his possession of the chair of Peter in the Lateran Basilica in 2005. Exactly. He basically takes the same explanations of Pope Benedict and he reformulates them, but the identical meaning, love and unity, exactly what Benedict XVI said. Let me see. We'll get to the Benedict later. I'm going to just continue here. So, love and unity. So he says, these are the two dimensions of the mission entrusted to Peter by Jesus. So love and unity are the functions of the ministry of Peter, the ministry of the successors of Peter. And he is applying that to himself. My mission, Christ's mission gave to me, is love and unity. And as I said, this is exactly what Benedict XVI said in 2005, which we're going to see at the end of the video. And he talks about Jesus and the fishers of men and so forth. And then he says, so Jesus Christ called Peter and the other first disciples to be like him, to be fishers of men, to be like. So it is exactly his function to do the same thing, and the bishops to be exactly like Peter and the first disciples, which is meaning to be like Jesus Christ, to be doing what? Be fishers of men, to collect them into the one net, into the one boat. And he says, now after the resurrection, it is up to them, to Peter and the other apostles, and of course their successors, to carry out this mission, which is what? To be fishers of men, which echoes what Jesus Christ, after the resurrection, before the ascension, told his apostles to go and preach the gospel to all nations, teaching them all that I have taught you, commanding them to obey it, and to baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And all who are believe will be saved. All who reject the faith or reject baptism are already condemned. That is the words of Jesus Christ. Carry out this mission and cast their nets. So he tells them, now after the resurrection, it is up to them to carry out this mission, to cast their nets again and again. So basically, don't give up. To do what though? to build fraternity, secularist, materialist love among the people, and that's it. No, to bring the hope of the gospel into the waters, he puts it in quotation marks, of the world. To bring the hope of the gospel into the waters of the world. To sail the seas of life so that all may experience God's embrace. So this is the function. Is the function to be fishers of men, so is to bring the hope of the gospel to the whole world. And why? So these people, those who don't belong to the one family, may experience the God's embrace. And he was saying, like in one of his speeches, said, like the church's open arms. It's like the father for the prodigal son, waiting to embrace anyone who comes to her. So I'm going to skip a whole bunch, and then he talks about, again, the functions of Peter, the functions of the successor of Peter, the functions of the Bishop of Rome, the functions of the Vicar of Christ. Peter is thus entrusted with the task of doing what? Loving more. And he talks about, Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you, Lord, but you can go watch the whole, read it or whatever. So Peter is thus entrusted with the task of loving more and giving his life for the flock. Giving his life. So it is up to the shedding of the blood. Because Christ said, there is no greater love than laying down your life for your friends. And who is giving his life not for the world? No, it is the function of Peter is to give his life for the single flock. The ministry of Peter is distinguished precisely by his self-sacrificing love, because the Church of Rome, this is key, the Church of Rome presides like a president. It presides in charity, meaning in love, and in true authority. And this was said as well, as I'm going to show you at the end, by Benedict XVI, as that he was echoing Benedict XVI in 2005 when he took over the throne of Peter, the chair of Peter in the Lateran Basilica. And this, I don't know if he mentioned, did I skip it or he said it before? Anyways, this he meant, because this word, the Church of Rome presides in charity. He talked to the Eastern churches before. This is a quotation, comes from Saint Ignatius of Antioch, the successor of Peter in Antioch, when he was on his way to be martyred in Rome. And he was writing one of his epistles, I can't remember how many epistles he wrote, one of his letters, to be martyred, writing like he knows he's going to die. He was eaten by lions. And he was a successor of Peter, but Peter came to Rome and died in Rome. So he was writing to the church in Rome, and that's how they wrote in the early church. Not the Church of Rome, the Church of Alexandria, the Church of New York. No, it is the church in Rome. So anyway, so St. Ignatius of Antioch, he addresses the church in Rome. And of course, as if you read St. Ignatius of Antioch, he emphasizes that the bishop is the head of the church of whatever city you're in. So the bishop is the head of that church, and he basically represents Christ. So when he talks about the church, so Ignatius of Antioch talks about the church in Rome presiding in charity. So, and it's not the church meaning the people. It is the head of that church, which would be the bishop. So ergo, it is the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, the successor of Peter in Rome. So this is where the term comes from. So again, it says, the ministry of Peter is distinguished precisely by his self-sacrificing love, because the Church of Rome presides in charity, coming from St. Ignatius of Antioch, one of the apostolic fathers, who uses that term. And its true authority, not its false supremacy, I'm gonna, be an absolute monarch like the absolute monarchs of the 19th century or 18th or 19th century in Europe. No. It's true authority. And its true authority is the charity, the love of Christ. It is never a question of capturing others by force. So we're not doing force you to obey us. We're going to force you, these who are not in communion with us, to join. No, it's not a question of force. You have to do it willingly, otherwise it's meaningless. By religious propaganda. Again, religious propaganda is distinguished from the missionary mandate. It is different than preaching the gospel. It is different than apologetics. Propaganda and apologetics and preaching the gospel are two different things. Or by means of power. So this is not. So the true authority is the charity of Christ. It is never a question of capturing others by force, by religious propaganda, or by means of power. Instead, it is always and only a question of loving as Jesus did. Loving as Jesus did. What did he want? He wanted one flock, one shepherd. He did not want 50 billion churches. So, and okay. Now, and then he continues, moreover, if Christ is the rock, because Jesus, even though the apostle himself tells Jesus, the apostle Peter himself tells us that Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you. You who? He's talking to the Hebrews, the Judeans, rejected by you, the builders, and has become the cornerstone. So he's quoting St. Peter's apostolic, his preaching on the day of Pentecost to the multitude of the Jews coming from all over the world. You rejected, he's the stone, and that you rejected. And then if you remember the preaching, people, and he tells them, Peter says, you crucified him. And he says, well, if you think about it, how did they crucify him? They're coming from Arabia and Syria and Egypt. Like, they had nothing to do with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But in a sense, by rejecting the promised Mashiach, the Messiah, you crucify him because you spit in the face of the awaited Son of Man, according to Daniel, who was going to come, whose time was actually determined. If the prophecy of Daniel for the appearance of the Son of Man, who is the Messiah, was basically exactly the time of the appearance of Jesus Christ. That's why if you read in the Gospels, people are running around asking, is he the prophet? Is he the Messiah? Why would anybody think even asking that question? Because everybody has had the expectation of the appearance of the Son of Man, of the appearance of the Messiah, the awaited Messiah. Why? Because this was the time prophesied by Daniel the prophet. So he says, Peter must shepherd the flock. When he says Peter, he's speaking to himself and to all the popes of the history of the bishops of Rome. Peter must shepherd the flock without ever yielding to the temptation which is ever present, without yielding to the temptation to be an autocrat, or as Benedict XVI would say, an absolute monarch. This is the section which mirrors identity. So Peter must shepherd the flock without ever yielding to the temptation to be an autocrat, lording it over those entrusted to him. So those entrusted to Peter. So there, and he quotes 1 Peter 5:3. So yes, he is the head, and this flock is entrusted to him. So he's the shepherd of the flock. But being the shepherd does not mean you're an autocrat. Does not mean you're lording it over them. Does not you're an absolute monarch whose will is law, as Benedict says. On the contrary. And this, actually, I'm going to skip to Benedict because this is basically identical. I'm going to just read you the Benedict section. So the power of teaching, The power of teaching in the church involves, this is Benedict XVI in 2005, the power of teaching in the church involves committed to the service of obedience to the faith. The Pope is not an absolute monarch whose thoughts and desires are law. On the contrary, and then you go to Leo XIV, on the contrary, identical. He called us to serve the faith of his brothers and sisters and to walk alongside them. For all of us are living stones, called through our baptism to build God's house, not houses, not condos, not mansions. It is one house, God's house, in fraternal communion, meaning brotherly communion, in the harmony of the Spirit, in the coexistence of diversity. So basically, being members of that one house, we don't have to give up our, like he was talking to the Eastern bishops, our diversity, which it is a treasure. Even Vatican II calls it a treasure of the Apostolic Church. All the liturgies, the customs, the disciplines. Watch my previous video on when he talks to because Vatican II says that. Leo XIV says the same thing. So we don't have to be an autocrat lording it over. The Pope is not an autocrat lording it over the people. On the contrary, he's to serve the faith. And we are all living so, and God's one house is a communion. And it is a coexistence of diversity, not diversity of faith, a diversity of doctrine, a diversity of religion. No, it is the diversity of customs and traditions and rites and maybe even theological explanations of the one and the same truth. And then he quotes St. Augustine. I'm going to just go back to Benedict. The service of obedience to the faith. So the power of teaching in the church involves commitment to the service of obedience to the faith. The Pope is not an absolute monarch whose thoughts and desires are law. On the contrary, the Pope's ministry is a guarantee of obedience to Christ and to his word. He must not proclaim his own ideas, but rather constantly bind himself and the church to obedience to God's word in the face of every attempt to adapt it or water it down and every form of opportunism. I'm going to just continue a bit with Benedict and go back to Leo. The chair, meaning the chair of Peter, is, let us say it again, a symbol of the power of teaching, which he mentioned the power of teaching here before as well. He does say about, to serve the faith of the brothers without lording it up. Anyway, so Benedict says here, let us say again, the chair is, let us say it again, a symbol of the power of teaching, which is a power of obedience and service, so that the word of God, the truth, may shine out among us and show us the way of life. So the truth will show us the way of life. But in speaking of the chair of the Bishop of Rome, how can we forget? So now that's what I mentioned before about the Ignatius of Antioch, which Leo XIV said when he was explicitly when he was talking with the bishops of the Eastern churches, Catholic churches, and in this speech he references it again about the Church of Rome in Rome presiding in charity. So here Benedict himself says, but in speaking of the chair of the Bishop of Rome, how can we forget St. Ignatius of Antioch's words addressed to the Romans? Ignatius, for his part, while remaining Bishop of Antioch, was also heading for the martyrdom that he was to suffer in Rome. In his letter to the Romans, he refers to the Church of Rome as she who presides in love, she who presides in charity, a deeply meaningful phrase. then Benedict continues, presiding in doctrine and presiding in love must in the end be one and the same. The whole of the Church's teaching leads ultimately to love, which is echoed identically with Leo XIV. Presiding in doctrine and presiding in love must be in the end one and the same. The whole of the Church's teaching leads ultimately to love. And this is basically repeated again by Leo XIV. So Leo, again, go back to Leo, he says here, basically what do we want? Our great desire is a united church. One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. A united church. We don't have, that's my own thing. We don't want like what Francis did. Francis created a divided church. He actually proclaimed, said, I'm not afraid of schism. He said, I might be the Pope who brings in division and schism in the church. This is what Jorge Bergoglio, also known as Pope Francis, declared, which is contrary to the gospel. It's contrary to the will of Christ. It is an anti-gospel and an anti-Christ by an anti-pope, maybe, probably. Anyways, let's. So he wants a united. So, and of course, Jorge went and into his demonically inspired rampage against all things traditionals. This diversity. He went in massive attacks on traditional Catholic religious orders, massive attacks on solid Orthodox Catholic bishops who were open to this diversity of charisms in the Church of God, especially traditional ones. He removed so many of them. He went on a rampage against the ancient apostolic liturgy of the Roman Church by trying to ban it, basically, trying to stomp it out. That he and his cohorts in the Vatican proclaimed from the housetops that the ancient Roman liturgy has a different ecclesiology and a different theology and doctrine than the post-conciliar updated liturgy of Paul VI. And that is why it had to be eliminated. This is explicit. This is, you watch my older videos, not older videos, just look at Latin Mass or Pope and Latin Mass or ancient Roman Rite or whatever it is. This is what he and his Cardinal Roche, Cardinal Cantalamessa, the professor, I forgot his name, in the University of Bologna, who is basically the brains behind Francis's liturgical suppression. They all said that. They said the old liturgy is a different religion. It's a different religion, a different ecclesiology. It's a different doctrine compared to the post-conciliar liturgy. That's why it has to be basically destroyed and banned. Now, if you're going to go between old and new, apostolic and invented in 1969, what do you choose? To be Christian, to be Catholic, to follow the apostolic tradition, to follow what Jesus himself taught, to follow what all the Eastern churches do and hold. You accept the old and reject the new. You're going to put this dichotomy between the old and new, then the new must be rejected in favor of the old. So he wants a united church, not a divided church, not a church which rampages against all those who are simply want to pray as their fathers did, who want to live as their fathers did, who want to believe as their fathers did. So he says that we, the church, want to be a small leaven of unity, communion, and fraternity within the world. So it is not, we're going to all be blended with the world. No, we are the ones who want to be in the unity and the fraternity and the communion. So we'll be a kind of a leaven for the world. So the world will grow into that true unity and actually come into the fold of the one house of God. He says, we say to the world. So this is basically like echoes, because he quoted Peter in his first preaching of the gospel on Pentecost. He quoted it, and that's a very controversial. Tells the Jews, you got to be baptized and accept Jesus Christ. And of course, when you read in the Acts of the Apostles, all the new converts, 3,000 that day, dedicated themselves to the doctrine of the apostles. That is what it says, to the doctrine of the apostles. So, so he says, so now Peter in Leo XIV, he says, I am telling the world. So here it is. He says, now we want to say to the world, to everybody here, everybody listening, everybody watching, with humility and joy. So not pridefully, not whatever. No, with humility and joy. Because why? We want their salvation. We want them to join the one church, one family of Jesus Christ, one family of God. He says, what do we want to say to the world? Look to Christ. Come closer to him. Welcome his word and enlightens and consoles. Listen to his offer of love and become his one family. In the one Christ, we are one. So I'm going to repeat this very, very important declaration, preaching of the gospel, telling the world to convert and to join the one family of Jesus Christ. He says, we want to say to the world with humility, look to Christ, come closer to him, welcome his word that enlightens. So your veil in front of your eyes or your darkened heart will be enlightened, and darkened intellect will be enlightened, and consoles. Listen to his offer of love and become his one family. In one Christ, we are one. Perfection. This is the path to follow. This is basically the ecumenism, if you want to talk about it. And this word, he didn't use the word, but I'm just popping it in there. So this whole method of talking and preaching and approaching and what needs to be done, this is the path to follow together among ourselves. First of all, among ourselves, we are the family. So we need to have this unity, but diversity is okay. And actually, it's a treasure, especially when it comes to liturgical, disciplinary, spiritual heritage. Among us, but also with our sister Christian churches. And remember, it was clear, actually, Vatican II says it, Benedict XVI clarified it, made it actually, I think it was when he was in Cardinal Ratzinger under John Paul II, like we can't call Protestant communities churches, because first of all, they don't have an apostolic succession, and they don't have valid sacraments, except maybe for baptism. Maybe. So he explicitly states that all the apostolic churches, so Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, are maybe correctly called churches, because as St. Ignatius of Antioch says, you cannot even call yourself a church if you don't have a bishop, priesthood, priests, and deacons. You don't have these, you're not even a church. And for Protestants, they don't have bishops, like not somebody calling themselves a bishop, but actually of apostolic succession. They don't have valid priests. They don't believe in a priesthood or a sacrifice or anything so. And they don't have deacons. Again, deacons are like the Levites or Levites of the Old Testament, serving the altar, serving the priests in the sanctuary. Again, they don't have that. So they are not a church, according to St. Ignatius of Antioch. According to Benedict XVI Ratzinger, under John Paul II, according even to Vatican II, because it does make a distinction between churches and ecclesial communities. So this is the path. So we want to have all of that, to come to Christ, to welcome, to listen, to become the one family, first of all, among ourselves who are in the one family, and to our sister Christian churches, basically to join that one family. With those who follow other religious paths. So we're telling other people who follow other religious paths to join, to listen to to look to Christ, to come closer to him, to welcome his word that enlightens, to listen to his offer of love, to become his one family for those who are in other religious paths. And the same goes to those who are searching for God, with all women and men of goodwill, in order to build a new world where peace reigns. Because the only way to peace reign is for those to all to become part of the one family, one house of God. And he says, this is the missionary spirit that must animate us. Unlike what Francis used to say, he would have called this proselytism. He would have called this against human dignity. He would have called this evil. But we have Leo here, who is echoing the perennial, the ancient yet ever new teaching of the church, which is the mission Christ gave to the apostles, to go and preach the gospel to all nations. This is the missionary spirit that must animate us. Not closing ourselves off in small groups. Yes, you don't want to close yourself off. Okay, we don't want to deal with the world. We're the Christians. We're the chosen. Let them all go to hell. No, this is not what Jesus wanted. Jesus wanted us to bring the whole world to the truth, to the knowledge of the truth. Nor feeling superior to the world. You don't want to feel, because pride is not a... pride is your downfall, basically. We don't want to feel superior. We should feel grateful that we are amongst the elect, we hope. As we are among the elect. Let's hope. And he said, like, again, St. Paul says, I'm not going to boast, because, after, I can't remember the exact words, but basically, I don't want to, after I've preached to others, that I myself fall. That's what pride, and then you get lost. So he said, it's not with pride, feeling superior. We should be feeling grateful. We should be feeling humbled that we have been chosen, that we have found the one house of God. They are members of the one house of the King, because we are in the one sheepfold of the one King. We are in the one sheepfold, which is the one kingdom, because if the King rules his sheepfold, we are in a kingdom. We are in the kingdom of Christ, which is the Catholic Church. Not closing ourselves, not feeling superior to the world. We are called, what are we supposed to do? To offer God's love to everyone. Because in the previous paragraph, he explains what that is. Listen to Jesus, look to him, come to him, listen to his word, become part of his family. And what is that? It is offering God's love to everyone. Because God sent his Son that all who believe in him might be saved. That he so loved the world that he offered his only Son for the remission of our sins and the opening up of the gates of heaven and salvation. So it is not out of pride. It's for God's love for everyone. That's why we offer this. That's why we offer Jesus Christ to the world. Why? For their salvation, because this is the love of God for everyone. Because God desires all to be saved. Desires. But if you reject to be saved, then it's up to you then. In order to achieve that unity, which does not cancel our differences, but values values the personal history of each person, and social and religious, and the social and religious culture of every people. So again, this unity, I think this probably is directed very much to the Eastern Orthodox, to the Oriental Orthodox, to the Apostolic churches. This unity doesn't mean that your social and religious culture will be watered down or eliminated or suppressed. No, no, no. We want it there. Like when he was talking to the Oriental Eastern Church, Catholic churches, he said, don't water down your liturgies. Don't update them for the utilitarian reasons. No, hold on to your apostolic liturgical traditions and spirituality intact, because otherwise it is corruption, which is exactly what happened to the Roman liturgy, the Roman rite. It has been corrupted. It has become utilitarian, commercialized. So yeah, when he's talking about religious culture, he's not talking, oh yeah, I'm going to be worshiping, my 50 billion gods, or a God who rejects Jesus Christ as his son, as the religion of peace does, or anything like that, and we're not going to offend you. No, no, no. He's talking about, first of all, to bring them to Christ, to join the one family of God. This is the missionary spirit. God loves you, so come. And when you're in the truth and the one family, of course, you hold on to the one faith. And especially if it goes it's much closer to the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox, which for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, have the exact same faith. Of course, some extremists want to make it seem like we have two different religions, but I reject that. So yeah, your heritage, your tradition, your liturgical, spiritual heritage is not going to be eliminated. It's not going to be Latinized, Romanized, Novus Ordoized. No. Brothers and he ends it with saying, brothers and sisters, this is the hour for love. The heart of the gospel is the love of God. The heart of the gospel is the love of God. And as I said, this echoed exactly what Benedict XVI said. Presiding in doctrine and presiding in love must be, in the end, be one and the same thing. The whole of the church's teaching leads ultimately to love. And again, Leo says the heart of the gospel is the love of God. That makes us brothers and sisters. And then he ends his sermon, his homily. So actually, I'm going to end it with a quotation of a mug. Actually, I'm going to show you the mug here, which I got from Os Justi Press, Os Justi Press, O-S, Justi, Justi, Press, Press.com, Os Justi Press, which is, I think, run by Peter Kwasniewski. He writes a lot about the liturgy. And here's the mug. I like the picture here, the icon of Jesus Christ on his throne. And on the back, there's a quotation from Joseph Ratzinger, who was Benedict XVI, about the First Vatican Council. I'm going to read it for you. It says, the First Vatican Council had in no way defined the Pope as an absolute monarch. So this is not even in his speech from 2005. So it is prior. So again, we're going to repeat it. The First Vatican Council had in no way defined the Pope as an absolute monarch. On the contrary, again, that word, on the contrary of Leo XIV, on the contrary of Benedict XVI, on the contrary of Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. On the contrary, it presented him, meaning Vatican I, it presented him as the guarantee of obedience to the revealed word. The Pope's authority is bound to the tradition of faith, and that also applies to the liturgy. So the Pope is bound to the tradition of faith, which also applies to the liturgy. He can't just go around and create a banal on-the-spot product, as Cardinal Ratzinger called your regular Mass, the fabrication of 1969 of Annibale Bonini. I'll continue. It is not manufactured, like this tradition of the faith. It is not manufactured by authorities. Even the Pope can only be a humble servant of the lawful development and abiding integrity and identity. So, even the Pope can only be a humble servant of its lawful, meaning as well the liturgy itself, the faith and the liturgy. So the Pope, all he can do is simply be a humble servant of its lawful development. Again, not evolution of doctrine, but development. And abiding integrity and identity. The authority of the Pope is not unlimited. The authority of the Pope is not unlimited. For those people worshippers out there, the Pope's authority is not unlimited. It is bound. It is at the service of sacred tradition. So the Pope's authority is at the service of sacred tradition. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger. Okay, so I like this mug because this is a good reminder. Even, God forbid, Leo XIV says something not in keeping with the scriptures or with tradition or with the apostolic faith or with the perennial doctrine of the church, we can say, as Leo himself said, he's not an autocrat, he can do whatever he wants, he's not an absolute monarch, as Ratzinger, Benedict XVI said. He's bound to truth, bound to the scriptures, bound to the gospel, bound to the integrity of the faith. He's bound to it. So, God forbid he says that. And if he deviates from the path, unless it has to be explicit. It cannot be like he uses the word synodality, but he means the correct way. He might quote, we should have fraternity amongst of the world with everybody, should open to be fraternal. Yes, doesn't mean that we water down our teaching. Two different things. But anyways, that's basically all I wanted to show you today, and bring these certain points which might have eluded some other commentators online who simply either just read the thing, or they actually have seen commentators talking about this inaugural speech talking about, oh, it's an ecumenical thing. No, it is very clear. There's one church, there's one supreme shepherd entrusted by God himself, by Jesus Christ, and there is only one family of God, and all are invited to join that one family. So, it is solid. We got a solid Pope for all intents and purposes, and we should be glad about that. All right, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. You can as well insult me, tell me your microphone is too close and I hear you're swallowing, and whatever. Anyways, do whatever you like, comment, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time. All right, bye-bye.